Hello, and welcome to the Social Psychic Radio Show, featuring Jason Zook. In uncertain times, we must change our focus and priorities. This show will highlight social justice issues with the goal of expanding minds and increasing unity, love, and mutual respect for ourselves and our planet. We support the Black Lives Matter movement. Our show aspires to promote social spirituality, which simply means that by coming together, we can solve any of our problems, including the goal of bringing an end to all forms of hate, discrimination, bias, or oppression. We must protect our environment, reform our criminal justice system, and protect every citizen from police brutality. When we come together, it becomes possible to bridge the gaps that plague our society and divide us from within. We the people means everyone.
Hello and welcome to the Social Psychic Radio Show. This is Jason Zook. It's a great pleasure I have the opportunity of presenting special guest Alex Smith to the show today. Alex is a sci-fi writer who's on the show to promote Black Fans, an LGBTQ people of color cyberpunk superhero comic series. Alex is in the process of having this project published through a Kickstarter campaign. The link to the campaign is actually included in the show notes below. To date, Alex has raised approximately $15,426 towards this project, and it's set to be released in September. Alex is a musician, art punk bands Solarized and Rainbow Crimes. He's an activist with Metropolarity Queer Sci-Fi Collective and cultural arts critic with Pitchfork, The Key, Bandcamp, and Philly Gay News. Alex is a recipient of the Pew Fellowship in the Arts and soon-to-be-published author of the sci-fi cyberpunk superhero afrofuturist short story collection ARKDUST, forthcoming from Rosarium Publishing. Alex's contact information is also included in our program notes. And I just want to talk a little bit about Alex's comic story book that we're talking about, Black Vans. It's a comic book, a cyberpunk superhero mashup, a strange tale about pharmaceutical companies run amok in a future Philadelphia where hackers provide intel, communications, and surveillance for the slowly disappearing superhero community. The hackers, called EQs, are a wild bunch. They fall along the queer LGBT spectrum, their ranks reflecting the ethnic diversity of the city they're from and of the larger world. It's a great pleasure I welcome Alex to the show. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
I found out about this, and I always like to pay homage to how I find out about a potential interview. And in this particular situation, I am grateful that there's a group I belong to, a platform called Greenlight, and Shane Sanders is a member of Greenlight, and he informed me about your project. And I decided to reach out to you through Instagram. I think it was like a week or two ago.
Yeah,
cool. I'm so happy we got a chance to touch base with each other because this is exactly the type of stuff that I want to promote on my show. And so my first question is this: what motivated you to create Black Vans?
Well, I guess that would be like a two-tiered question. One, I really like comics. Ever since I was maybe like 8 years old, I've been super into comics. And it's an interesting field, and it's very difficult to get into. I know to a lot of people it doesn't seem like it would be, but yeah, there's a lot of sort of networking and who you know and when you know who scenarios. It's probably closer to like the film industry, I guess, than it is, say, like the music industry or the fine art industry. It's not really about, so like, you know, that's if you want to participate in the mainstream. I just wanted to forego finding an editor, finding a agent, finding a publicist, and pitching this story endlessly to publishers. And I just wanted to put it out myself, just to have the ideas already out there and just to, like, you know, get working. I guess the second part of that is that I wanted to create a comic that featured POC characters, Black characters in their own heroic story. There's been a pretty good surge of diverse comics, but it's mostly coming from a lot of underground and independent publishers and stuff. You know, yeah, I wanted to add new stories to that oeuvre, I guess. I wanted to become a part of that community and to not just have diverse characters, but to have characters that have agency and Black characters who are stars of the show, you know, instead of just background or sidekicks. That's kind of like a two-tiered motivation behind doing this. And, I just really enjoy writing sci-fi. So yeah, it was a no-brainer.
I have a best friend from college. He's my age, 45, and he's been writing comics, and he's been into comics and writing his own stuff for like 25 years. And I always tell him every day, I still think you're going to make it big. You're going to be discovered. You're going to have these opportunities. And I wish the same for you as well. I think it's amazing that you've decided to take a vision and put it into action. Right. And creating your strip, I shouldn't call it strip, I should say your story. When you compare it to Marvel, how different do you see your characters compared to what we see on the big screen today? And do you think that in the future we'll be able to see characters more closely aligned to what you're creating, reflecting diversity, inclusivity, and people of color than what's out now? And how do you see us getting there?
So Marvel has like decades and decades and decades of history, right? The same with DC and a lot of these mainstream comics companies. So, their characters are embedded in the society that we live in. Like everyone knows who Spider-Man is, but, nobody knows who Bo from Black Vans is, right? Like when I do my print run, it's going to have 500 copies. Like Spider-Man sells 500 copies in like 2 hours, right? So it's a totally different world, and it's a totally different sort of like arena of activity, and it's almost impossible to compare the two. As far as like Marvel and DC moving towards diversifying their lineups, like I have characters different sizes and shapes and ethnicities, and most of the characters are queer. So it's like, I don't really see that coming from the mainstream like anytime soon. Marvel and DC have a long way to go as far as that goes. Right now, so Bo, the main character in my story, he's a fat kid, but he's extremely athletic, extremely smart, but he's also still a flawed character. And I think, there's this kind of unspoken mandate at the MCU or whatever, that every character that they portray has to have like chiseled abs and sort of appeal to this sort of Adonis-like structure that brainwashed, for lack of a better word, into accepting as like a heroic body type. So, and you saw it reflective in their portrayal of Thor. They just gave, what's his name, like a fat suit or whatever, and then they just make jokes about him for like, an hour and a half. Or, they'll do their version of diversity, which means they'll just do a wink and a nod to a character being queer or something like that. And then they hype it up as if they're these grand ambassadors of inclusion just because they had like a gay side character, who appeared in a bodega or an AA meeting or something. And none of their mainstream, their mainline characters are gay or queer, trans or non-binary, but there'll be article after article after article praising Disney or the MCU about their sudden turn towards diversity. And, that's unfortunate. And, there's been volumes and volumes written about why that's bad, but yet they keep doing it. So it's something that, they're never going to like not do, I guess. It's going to take people like me, people who want to see a change. I'm 45 also, so it's going to take people.
You understand?
Yeah, no, I've been around. Like I've seen diversity sort of ebb and flow and go in and out of fashion or whatever within comics and science fiction. So I think it's just going to take whenever the next generation of creators comes about, and there's always been gay creators, there's always been creators of color. It's when those people are going to say, I need to start reflecting myself into these stories, and not in a wink, wink, nudge, nudge kind of way, but in a way that feels more empowering and more like respectable to their stories, and once they feel that they can demand that their stories be told, then we'll see a little bit of a budge. But it's also in the consumer's hands too. Like we shouldn't just rely on Marvel and DC and Warner Brothers and all these Fox and Sony, these large corporations, to tell us what our myths are going to be, to tell us our stories. We need to be able to like seek things out and find things on our own, because before the MCU, it took effort. It took effort to find out about all of these weird characters that we just kind of take for granted now. It's gonna depend on the audience too. want to seek out different ways of telling a story. So,
you and I are both in the same generation. We're 45. So you and I have seen, we can compare notes probably, even though we're different from I'm from New Jersey originally, but I remember it was such a big deal in the 80s that we had Cosby, and it was such a big deal in the 90s that Ellen came out in 97. And it's such a big deal today that Marvel's announcing drip, 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 a gay subplot that's like 30 layers under the big plot context. And now this is going on. So I want to ask you this, looking at what you've seen in your lifetime, where do you see the future of the comic industry going to reflect adequate representation of people of color and queer identity characters? And when do you think the critical, I guess, turning point will be?
That's two different industries, right? And I always have this discussion, like, especially online, when I'm talking about superheroes, let's just talk about superheroes, right? When I'm talking about superheroes, because superhero is just one genre within comics, right? But when I'm talking about superheroes, I always want to know what the OP, the original poster, is talking about, right? Are they talking about the people played by Chris Evans and Chris Pratt and Chris Pine and all the other Chris's? Or are they talking about these characters that existed on ink and Technicolor pages, that would smudge on your fingers in the back end of a bookstore somewhere? Are they talking about comics? Or are you talking about film, right? And so I think the two industries are absolutely, I'm not gonna say diametrically opposed to each other, but like they're going in different pathways. In the actual comics, you can explore better ideas. I was exposed to anarchism through like Grant Morrison comics with like The Invisibles. I was exposed to queer ideas through like Vertigo comics and through independent comics like Love and Rockets. And I was exposed to surrealism through Daniel Close comics, right? So, and I was exposed to ethnic diversity and like Black empowerment through Milestone comics. And this is, these are all older comics. Like the first time I saw a gay superhero was in Warren Ellis's Stormwatch, right? And it wasn't portrayed as a joke. It wasn't portrayed as a side thing. It wasn't portrayed as like this. They didn't have this huge coming out thing. It was just like these two characters embraced and then they kissed. And then from that point on, everyone knew that they were a couple, and it's the Midnighter and Apollo. They were total badasses, So it's going to take, so we're talking about two different worlds. A writer and an artist can draw whatever the hell they want. They have an unlimited budget. They don't have a lot of editorial oversight. Well, the editors of the big two can be pretty strict, but they're a lot more lenient than, say, a producer with a cigar. Like, how is this going to put butts in the seat? Like, nobody wants to see some gay stuff or whatever. Like, Black people can't be heroes. Like, it's not going to sell unless it's Denzel or Will Smith. So they have a different vibe in the actual comics. That's not saying that the comics are a utopia. They still have a long way to go. A lot of the fans are still kind of terrible, and they want to see. They think that any character, a lot of fans think that any character is not a cis white male is like some kind of agenda. Like there's a whole group of those guys who think that, but none of what the comics gators, which is right wingers, none of what they to see, like they can't stop the diversity, because as long as there's pen and paper, there's comics. And so people are making indie comics left and right. Like it's a really beautiful world out there right now. Having this independence is not necessarily leveling the playing field, but it's giving us a chance to even suit up, right? With the movies, it's a totally different world. There's so many layers of red tape you have to go through in order to get a movie made. Like I don't have $10 million to go make a small independent film that has decent effects that's going to be able to compete with anything the MCU and DC can come up with. So they're gonna take their time. They're gonna do what they feel is financially viable. There's debates whether or not like women or whatever should be in these films. Like when a woman-led superhero movie comes out, the uproar is ridiculous, and people try to game the system. And it's gonna take these bigwigs at Marvel and DC ignoring this sort of nasty minority voice, right-wing fan base. Everybody wants to come see these films, and everybody can. So someone's going to have to put their foot down. Like and just say, no, this is the story we want to tell. If J.J. Abrams had put his foot down and supported Rian Johnson and said, no, I like what Rian Johnson did with The Last Jedi. We're going to continue on this line. We're not going to cater to this minority fanboy voice, and we're going to really try to change things, right? That's what it's going to take. But it's also going to take little small moments like films like Moonlight, winning Best Picture. Once people start to make that connection, that you can have films like Moonlight for like a queer community or for a Black community, and hey, maybe The Matrix could be sort of moonlighted, right? Like, why can't Neo be a gay Black man? Morpheus, no, I'm just
or a gay Black woman, Yeah,
or not, right? Like, why can't Morpheus be trans? It makes sense. And speaking of The Matrix, like, their directors are 2 trans women. So, once people's voices start amplifying louder and making money, the people who are marginalized start like coming into money and things like that, then that's what's going to change that industry. So it's 2 different industries. There's comic books, which are a lot more freer and more fluid, and you can do a lot more things. And then there's the films, which are just loaded with, like, the first ever film was, probably one of the most racist films ever made. So it's like we're dealing with that baggage when it comes to trying to break through any of the glass ceilings in Hollywood. So it's going to take a while, but we're getting there.
I understand. I want to ask you this. What has been the greatest challenge you've encountered working on this project?
The biggest challenge has been not feeling bad for advertising about it. On the surface, I think people think that I'm really good at like networking and advertising my stuff and branding and all this stuff, but I feel like awful doing it. Like, I don't know. I feel like I'm putting a lot of pressure on my friends to support me, and I feel like one of those guys with chomping on a cigar, and like, I don't know, I feel sleazy just trying to sell myself.
Self-promotion is hard. I know it's hard. I have my own show, and I don't ever, I do my posts and stuff, and you get used to it. I've been doing it for 4 years, but when you first start doing this and you put yourself out in the public eye and you got to promote what you're passionate about, I know what you're talking about. It's a challenge. Sure. And you feel like if you approach your friends about it, that they're thinking you're just having an agenda to promote your stuff to them.
Sure. And it's like, I guess I don't really have imposter syndrome per se, but I have I just don't want to come across as just like selling a product to people. But I want to come across as like having people embrace these moments that I create, like ARKDUST or any of my bands or like the comics, as like these movements that they can get behind. And that's like 2 different points of view of describing, I guess, the same. I try to frame it in a way that feel like they're reflected in the work that I'm doing, and not just, buy this self-indulgent thing because, I want to make money. And that's absolutely not it. So that's been the hardest thing. Not necessarily the physical aspects of promotion, the mental toll that it has kind of taken or whatever. But the art and the writing, that's the easy part. I've been doing that since I was like 5 years old. So, that's not even a big deal. And like working with James Dillenbeck, the artist, who is just going to be a rising star, that's been super, super easy. Like, we're really good friends now. We met online, but now we're really good friends. So that's been like, super easy. The person that I did layout with, he's also a friend, and they've been really, really solid with it. So I don't know. It's just been that part about it, about trying to sell it to someone and like prove my worth or whatever. That's another thing I don't want to do. That's one reason why I don't apply to a lot of grants. I don't send my work to short story magazines, and
you sound like, I'm sorry. After you.
No, I'm just saying I don't like send my demo to like, Sub Pop or whatever, because like I'm not trying to prove that what I'm doing is worth putting out. Like, I already know that it is, and I don't have the time to wait around for other people to tell me that it is. Like, if we try to get Black Vans or any of my other projects out on a major label, it would have to be, so we'd have to finish the project, then we have to come up with a pitch Bible, and then we'd have to like talk to editors, publishers, agents, right? And then we'd have to get rejected 10 million times, and then someone maybe would find it worthy enough to put out. And then it's like 3 years after I've already announced it, right? Like, so it's just more, I don't have the energy and the time to sort of like wait around for some guy in a suit to tell me that they want to sign me or whatever. I would love to write for DC and Marvel, but right now I just want to do what I'm doing. And then maybe if that can segue into something else, that's great.
Tell me a little about the Kickstarter campaign that you did for this. How did you start that? And it's amazing. Congratulations on meeting your goal over by a few thousand, right? So I'm so excited for you on that. That's a huge accomplishment. And during this pandemic and everything that's been going on, that's huge. Tell us a little about that.
Well, I was a little nervous about doing that. Again, like I said, because of all the trepidation around organizing things like this. But, I have a solid friend base and a solid base of people who are like interested in some of the things that I'm working on. I had a strong feeling that it would get funded, but it's still these moments where you're like, is this really going to happen? But
I mean, you had 348 people back you on this project. That reflects a significant level of support that you should really pat yourself on the back for, man. That's not something I've ever done. And I don't think most of our listeners have done that before. I think that's a great accolade for you.
Yeah. And I think the story is interesting. It doesn't feel like a typical sci-fi or a typical superhero tale. And I think, of course, James's artwork is just phenomenal, right? So those things combined really helped us a lot. And through our two, networks, we were able to really come across as having something that we can feel, proud to present. I think the Kickstarter campaign itself, I was like, should I do a video? But then I was like, I want to keep this as minimal as possible. That's my one piece of advice to anyone doing a Kickstarter: minimalism. Because if you're offering a lot of rewards that you can't come through with, then it gets really difficult. Donate $500 and Channing Tatum will come and sing at your you can't promise that, right? So we just promised the basic things, and we set it up in the context of if you want to participate in this, then it's kind of more like a donation, right? But you'll also get these. So, you have to be as realistic as you can about the tiers and the rewards that you can promise.
You're still accepting the Kickstarter for how much longer until you conclude it, or what's?
Yeah, it's at this point it's 26 hours left on it. So,
So we did our show literally at the end of your Kickstarter campaign. Yeah. That's good timing.
But there's going to be a second printing, so if people want to order it, they can. So.
Okay, and a little about that. I pre-ordered for $12. You could pre-order and get your own copy of the comic, and I'm excited about that. I'm gonna put that on my coffee table, so when people actually come over in the future at some point, I could share your work and share your story.
Yeah.
I want to ask you that.
There's 4 issues, so hopefully within the year, the whole story will be out. And so, yeah.
Great. Are any of the characters in Black Vans based on real life?
Probably bits and pieces of my friends. But for the most part, no. I guess one of the characters kind of dresses like me, but other than that, I don't really think so. Yeah.
Okay.
No. Maybe the bad guy is a mix of all the shitty guys that have been floating around for the past 6 or 7 years. The main bad guy's kind of got some Martin Shkreli, meets Donald Trump meets Mark Zuckerberg kind of thing going on. He's a tech pharmaceutical magnate, and he just is slimy, greasy, and right wing and fascist. So,
what is a cyberpunk superhero comic series, and how does it differ from traditional? I wouldn't say the word traditional, but how does yours? How is a cyberpunk superhero comic series portrayed differently than what we'd see on the big screen, or when I say big screen, I should really just say the comic strips that we normally are.
So I've been really into this sort of 80s retro futurism and sci-fi noir elements a lot. And it's not really an element that's explored a lot in superhero comics. So I wanted to give it, put some energy towards that. Basically, what if the X-Men universe looked more like Blade Runner, I guess? And also I'm into the idea of the political aspects of a lot of cyberpunk. We're in a weird time right now. Blade Runner takes place in 2019, right? The Running Man, it takes place in 2019. And Akira. It takes place in 2020, I think. So we're in this really weird time right now. We're in the future, and we have to deal with things like surveillance and lack of privacy, having our world sort of droned and Google mapped to death, right? So facial recognition, everything that like all these science fiction writers like Octavia Butler, William Gibson, George Orwell, like warned us against, right? We're kind of accepting into our homes. So for me, it's only really like natural to sort of write about those things and like add those elements into my story, other than just like, dun, 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 I'm a superhero. I saved the day. Here's your purse, ma'am. Stopping like bank robberies and stuff. It's just, that's whack, like what we do with our communal power. And that's how I view superhero power, is that it's a reflection of communal power. What we do with that can like change the world. So using our gifts, like how can we affect society? Like how can we like create a world that we want to live in and not just like go work for the military or whatever, we can actually actively save the world in our own communities. And that's a core element of like Afrofuturism, and especially when it's viewed through like a lens of the politics of cyberpunk,
I just wanted to say that how excited I am to feature this on my show because of the issues that we're in as a society right now with diversity, inclusivity, and everything. And LGBTQ stuff is really an important aspect of things in our lives. And I want to ask you this. When you look at the work you're doing right now, and you're a trailblazer, whether or not you realize it, I came across your information. I wanted to feature you because I'm like, this is notable. I don't know many people who are independently creating their own comic strips to reflect their reality of what they see the world through their eyes, right, or through the eyes of friends and close that to me is pivotal. When we show society a reflection through the eyes of you as an artist, right? And what you're creating, that's when you're going to get younger children and others in society to look at positive role models. And I wanted to ask you, do you feel in your gut that doing this project, the fact that you're able to put out LGBTQ role models to the public represents one of your key passions with this project?
Yeah, in a way. It's an adult comic, to be clear. Sure. But I read adult comics when I was a certain age. Like, it's not so adult that like it's impossible, for like someone 13 or 14 to read. So I do think like I want to create work that's got the same energy as the work that inspired me, right? I used to carry around Samuel Delany books in my back pocket all the time, right? Like I want to create work that sort of speaks that same language and has that same energy as I did when I was discovering like Public Enemy and Wu-Tang Clan, right? When I first when I first found Anarchy in the Black Revolution by Lorenzo Caboa Irving, like, and when I first found Ishmael Reed, and Toni Morrison, like, I want to create the kind of work that, I don't know, maybe I'll never be as good as them, but that has that impact in a similar way, right? In a way that where it can inspire someone to think along a different path than what's been laid out, right? And so that means being empowered, self-determined and empowered by who you are and like where you want to see the world in the future, and not necessarily through the lens of this kind of like overtly militarized world that we live in, right? So yeah, that's a huge part of like why I write what I write. Like a friend of mine, Sean Aline, and I've done this too. We do workshops, and sometimes the workshops are with kids, right? And we are like, yo, let's make comics, right? And it's just like a fun workshop, but it also gets kids to think about things critically, and think about stuff like design, think about futurity, think about like all kinds of things when you get a kid to like create a comic book, just creativity. And it sort of like breaks our heart that a lot of Black and brown kids don't design Black and brown superheroes, right? And it's because the world that they live in is sort of regimented and funneled into a sort of default whiteness, right? It's amplified worse in the heroes that we are absolutely constantly surrounding ourselves with. That's why I work like Into the Spider-Verse and Black Panther. That's why those works are so important and necessary and powerful. I want to be a part of that milieu, I guess, and sort of changing the narrative so that like young Black and brown kids can like define who they are through superheroes, through
I love that.
Yeah, why not?
I love that.
Like,
I love that message. I just think it's such a great message to have, to share, and to promote. Because if you can look at yourself in a comic strip or a comic story and read about yourself, you're going to feel better about yourself. You're not going to have these negative feelings about being disenfranchised or being not showing up and not represented. That's why I think it's so important that we talk about these type of topics and subjects, because you right now you've self-financed yourself. You're going to put this thing out there and you're going to say, hey, I have it. I'm ready to launch. Right. And I feel like the more people see things like what you're doing right now, the more you'll find other people, other Alexes in the future who are like, you know what? I want to do something representative of myself, or I want to put something out there. And I think that's the key to changing these long held beliefs and notions that white versus black or us versus them, that kind of stuff. I'm so excited and it's refreshing to me that society is starting to slowly change, but it's so slow and so gradual that I wanted to ask you, from your vantage point, and you look at all this, what do you think? Let's say there's someone 10 years old right now, and they haven't yet defined themselves of who they are, what they are. But what would you say to someone who's 10 years old right now, who's very creative and is an aspiring artist? How would you, I guess, advise them on what steps they should take in their path to follow their true path for themselves?
I would be very light with any advice that I would give a 10-year-old, because sort of my unspoken advice would be to don't lose that spark, right? Don't clearly define yourself. I would say to just absorb everything, absorb and observe everything, and just let it all kind of sink in. Don't be so, don't adhere to, that design concept isn't for Black people, or this type of music isn't for Black people. Don't be consumed by what is and isn't for you, but just be respectful of its origins and then absorb it into who you are, right? Just be as free as you want to be. And that would be, I guess, my only bit of advice for someone who's that young, is to just never lose that spark. Never not just be sitting at your dining room table and zoning out the world. That's the best creators never lost that spark, right? They never lost that sort of sense of wonder and awe. Not only, and I say that selfishly because we need that sense of wonder and awe, right? We need someone with that sense of wonder and awe to help us figure out how to get out of climate control, to help us figure out how to stop turning our inner city Black neighborhoods into food deserts, right? We need to figure out how we need someone with a sense of wonder and awe who's going to be maybe we should pay teachers more so that we can actually have curriculum that can spark and inspire, right? We need someone with a sense of wonder and awe who can say, maybe there's a solution to problems in Syria and Iran that don't involve shooting people, right? Maybe somebody who can imagine deeper can help us create this world that's a lot more equitable, right? And so I would absolutely tell any child, whatever you can come up with, and never lose that spark. Never lose that spark. I could technically show them how to draw a character or how to write a story, but the best piece of advice is to tell them that creativity should just be natural, it should flow, and it should not be limited by anything. So.
Definitely. I want to get into your story a little bit.
Okay.
What made you focus on pharmaceutical companies in future Philadelphia as a base of your story?
So it was during the time, like I said, of Martin Shkreli was buying up the Wu-Tang album and doing all kinds of evil stuff. He was charging hundreds of dollars for like drugs that people needed. Before he decided to mark up the price, drugs that were like $20 were now like in the hundreds,
It sickened me when I saw that. It sickened me.
Yeah. And I just thought that was a perfect allegory, symbolism for like capitalism run amok, right? And I saw who it was affecting the most, which was like poor people and people of color. I just was like, yeah, this is my bad guy. It's pretty clear, right? And looking back, there's plenty of things that we could talk about with regard to how to frame a sort of like cyberpunk story that has deeper ideas. But to me, and also like in Philadelphia, like there's a opioid epidemic that's like just really claiming a lot of lives. Of course, our city didn't care about it until it started affecting like white neighborhoods. So to me, like the sort of like built-in racism of the pharmaceutical industry and the medical industry, the perfect symbol for all the crap that we've been dealing with, like especially POC and especially, in our allies for like hundreds of years, centuries. And so I wanted to just write a story that showed people fighting through that dystopia. Like we're living in a dystopia if we can't get medicine, right? Like we're in it. So
right.
There's no way to ignore it right now. And I wanted my antagonist to have more than just like, I will destroy the world, as his motivation. I wanted to be reflective of something that people can relate to. So I figured, yeah.
I want to ask you about Bo, a plus-size gay bear of Afro-Latin descent who always seems to be messing up. How did you arrive at creating Bo, and how critical is Bo to your story?
Wow, thanks for that question. This is actually the first time someone's asked me about that, and I've done plenty of interviews, but because no one's asked me about the character specifically, which I think is kind of interesting. Well, it goes back to what we were talking about. Like everyone understands the characters in a sort of like ethereal way, but since it's not Spider-Man and Batman and Superman, it's like it's kind of hard for people, I think, to figure out how to ask the question. And you did obviously a great job of it. But Bo is like, he looks like dudes that I've dated, right? Like people that I've known for like years in my neighborhood or within the punk rock community. And it's time for people like Bo to have a chance to see themselves as being heroic, right? And the characters are kind of inspired by, if you read comics and you read them deeply, like superheroes are always aided by a sort of like nerdier character. A lot of times that character is like chubby or whatever, and just like not viewed as being someone that could kick ass, right? But they usually hang out in like these little black vans in the alleyway, and they give all the intel to the superhero, like where the bad guys are, and like
a Robin type.
Well, even less empowered than Robin, because they're they never actually see action. They're just the guys that have the earpieces on, right? So I wanted to pull those characters out of the shadows and sort of examine like what their life is like. Yeah, he's a big boy. He's sexy, and he is empowered, and he listens to punk rock. He plays soccer, and he's really, he really wants to make a difference, but he's struggling with where he can put his energies, and he's struggling with trying to figure out love and navigating these awkward moments with his best friend, Alistair. And so, they're both trying to like figure out why the superheroes are disappearing, and also doing it will they or won't they kind of thing. So I wanted, and like a huge part of where the character Bo comes from. So me and my partner, my husband, Shane, we would watch these really bad, we call them bad gay movies. And they're basically these movies with this sort of like simpleton, usually super white protagonist. And they're these like really stuffy characters that don't have any agency, right? But they're always looking to find like the hottest guy and like end up in this awesome romantic relationship. And that's kind of the crux of almost all of these independent gay films. And so, but you never see characters of size. You hardly ever see black and brown characters. And so I just wanted to sort of like, not necessarily subvert that, but to just like show that you can still tell a compelling story, even if the main character doesn't look like, I don't know, Timothy Chalamet or something, right? So yeah, that's basically where Bo comes from. And he was the first design that James did. As soon as I saw it, I was like, yo, this is going to be some fun stuff. So yeah, it's been really fun doing that.
Let's talk about Goring Gale.
Okay.
Goring Gale and Goring Gale's impact on the story. Tell our audience a little about Goring Gale and the character.
Okay. Well, I've been kind of talking about him a little bit. Like I said, he's a mashup of all the evil dudes that we know on the right wing. I can't tell you too much because there's going to be some reveals in issue 2 and 3, but he's definitely a piece of work. A little bit of, so mash all those evil dudes, the Trumps and the Pences and the Scarellis and like all those, and the Elon Musk types or whatever, and then throw in Kingpin from the Daredevil series, and you kind of have Goring Gale. He's a huge guy, right? But he's also extremely athletic, which you'll see in issue 2 and 3. Like, he's a badass. So not just in the fact that he has a lot of money, he's going to do some stuff that's going to probably shock people. So yeah. And not to say that issue 1 is all set up. I think issue 1 is definitely really kick-ass and really, but I like telling the stories in chapters so that you get this like rising feel to it. So yeah, look out for him. He hates superheroes. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. Because if I say too much, I'll be revealing. But just
without a giveaway. No spoilers.
He's this evil dude mashup. So, and he was definitely a lot of fun to write because James and I wanted to make him sexy and desirable as well. And so it was kind of difficult for us to write a character that we both felt was sexy and desirable, but also like evil as hell. And I think which is, to me, I've always been more attracted to the villains. I used to like root for Cobra Commander and
G.I. Joe.
Right. I felt bad for Skeletor, things like that. So
yeah.
Unless they were really, 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 really bad, like maybe Megatron or whatever, then yeah. So it's definitely got a little bit of that element too, like that element of like understanding the badassness of some of these villains that we sort of love to hate, like Magneto. But there's nothing relatable about Gale's politics, unlike maybe you could relate to Magneto's sort of self-empowerment politics, right? But there's nothing really relatable about Gale. That's the only thing I can say about him. Maybe that was a flaw in the writing a little bit, but I also think that it's time. Yeah, I think it's time to reveal these people for who they are. Like they're terrible, and we need to like really examine these people because they're controlling our lives, right? Like these billionaires and these politicians that are in the pockets, of the billionaires. So we got to really examine these things. And
what are blank ghosts? You referenced blank ghosts in your description. I wanted to ask you what that was.
The blank ghosts are these sort of like robot-esque paladins that Gale deploys. They're sort of the invention. Where they come from is sort of controversial. He uses the blank ghost as his security force. So what he's done is he's taken over security for the city of future Philly because people didn't trust the police, but something worse appeared in their stead. So now he's controlling the police in his own way, but he also has his own security force, the blank ghost. So yeah, there's a lot of layers to the story. It'll all be revealed, and then boom.
What's one thing about Black Vans that you have yet to share with the public, but which you would be willing to share on a show today?
Oh man, like story wise or creation wise, I guess.
I'll let you decide that one. I don't want to do over revealing too much without the book coming out.
Yeah, I don't know if I want to say. It's different than any of my other projects. So just because there's like such a strong visual element to it, like James's art just makes it just explode off the page. So that's all I can really say. I don't want to give too much away, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
How does Black Vans define your vision of the future?
That's a good one too. it's more of like a cautionary story in a way. So I guess I would say that like it's a darker vision of the future, but it's one that also I hope like inspires hope and inspires people to sort of like transform things and to take the reins. So yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question here.
Yeah.
We're running low on time, so I'm going to conclude this, but I want to ask you, where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
Hopefully doing the same thing. I quit the food industry a couple of years ago, and I've been doing art and writing full time. You know, I want to design. I do collage work also. So hopefully I want to design more album covers, more t-shirts, and I want to grow a little, very small, super small publishing company, maybe like 2 or 3 books a year, maybe 2 books a year, and maybe like publish other writers and artists. Yeah. So just keeping everything sort of small. If like Netflix comes calling, they want to put out, you know, Black Van's miniseries, I'm all down for it. But
absolutely.
Yeah, I guess as I get older, I have less and less energy to like want to kind of slut myself out there for the mainstream. I want to take opportunities as they come and just build on each one. So like I won the Pew, so that was really great. And it's given me like
tell us about that.
Oh yeah, that was really cool. It was, so I rarely apply to grants, but I was nominated and I was like, you know what, I have to do this. Some friends of mine have won Pews. Rashida Phillips and Kamea Yahweh, who do Black Quantum Futurism, they've won. Ursula Rucker, King Britt. So some people that I know have won. And I was like, well, why not me? You know, it's my time. And, you know, I applied to it. I found out that I was pretty decent at writing grants. So maybe I should apply for more because I won another one right before that.
Congratulations. That's amazing.
A way smaller one. But yeah, so, you know, I like I said, and the Pew has been really, really helpful and, you know, really empowering for me. And it's great to be able to talk to past winners and get advice. Yeah. And so, yeah, it's like just taking each little thing that's presented to me as its own entity and not trying to project too far into the future. I guess 5 years is a decent amount of time.
Sure.
So yeah, just taking things incrementally. And if an opportunity arises, then trying to like have enough energy and enough, I guess, emotional stamina to like nail it. Right. So that's where I want to be, and not waiting tables. So yeah.
I want to ask you, where can our audience find you? What would they do to reach out to you? I'm going to put the program notes for the Kickstarter, but that's ending in a few hours. But what would be the best way for our audience to find out more about you and to reach out and just find out more about Black Van and everything else?
I'm pretty active on Instagram. They can go to They Are Birds at They Are Birds, and they could also go to my website, Alexoteric, ALEXOTERIC.com. And I'm also at Alexoteric on Twitter. I'm not as on Twitter as much. I can't figure out how to use it. Like I don't know how. Huh?
I just shared that I supported the strip, Black Fans Today. I put on my Twitter feed so that hopefully anyone on my Twitter feed will find out about it.
Oh, great.
I just think this is such a great thing. So just so I get this right, it's ALEXOTERIC.com.
Yeah.
I'll put that in the program notes as well.
Awesome. So yeah, and if you can't afford to pledge right now, or if you're hearing this after the thing's over, you can go to alexoteric.com and there will be a link for you to be able to buy the book.
Well, here's what I gotta say to you. First off, I'm glad I could be on the original fundraising part of your project, and I'm glad that you could come on the show today and you agreed to come on and share these amazing ideas with our audience. Because one of the things I'm trying to do on my platform is present various aspects of diversity, inclusion, and acceptance. And I also believe heavily in the arts. And so you just brought all that rolled in one for my episode today. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. Yeah. It's really passionate. Your passion, it's breathtaking, man. I'm really excited for your project. I'm so happy that you have pursued this and you didn't give up and you pushed ahead. And I really do think you're setting a really, I'm getting speechless, a really positive advantage for our audience and a positive advantage for LGBTQ, people of color, and people who need to have positive role models in this world. That's what we need to push more of, is positivity, role models, and acceptance.
True.
And so in terms of your project, I already say you've already created a successful venture. How it goes from there is just sky's the limit for me to see for you, I think, personally. So I want to thank you for coming on today.
Yeah, no doubt, man. Thanks for having me. It's been really fun.
I just want to thank Alex Smith for coming on the show today and sharing his amazing details about his project and Black Vans. It's an LGBTQ, queer, people of color, cyberpunk superhero comic. And I'm going to put the information, as I said, in the show notes, as well as Alex's information. One of the things, my takeaway from this, I grew up in a time frame that very similar to Alex's, where we grew up and we saw role models on TV. We saw Superman. We saw Christopher Reeves as Superman. We saw, the various, I wouldn't say the evolution of characters over the years, where now we have more action hero movies with Marvel than we could have ever imagined as a child. I know when I was a child, I was really excited about the original Superman movies. And then we had Star Wars and we had all these amazing movies back then. But unfortunately, back then, they were all filtered. They were mostly white characters, mostly what was called mainstream characters. But in reality, it's not an accurate depiction of reality, of society itself and stuff. And so for me, my takeaway of this is when you're looking at someone who's an artist, who's establishing themselves from their point of view and promoting the ideals of equality, inclusivity, and acceptance, that's a big thing for me. That's important and that's critical. And when it comes to heroes, we've got to get out of the mindset and the paradigm that heroes wear capes, they got chiseled abs, they're straight, and they're superhuman, uber masculine individuals. In real life, heroes come in all shapes and sizes. They come of all persuasions. There's tons of unsung heroes out there that make amazing impacts in the lives of many. And for me, I consider Alex a hero in the arts because of what he's doing. He's focusing his efforts on creating something that's unique, but is also extremely important. We look at role models and they help define how we feel about ourselves internally. And that's why I feel it's so important that we have this type of information created out there. We need diversity, we need inclusivity, and we need to have a compassionate, open mind when we approach these things. So everyone in my audience, I encourage you to check out Alex's information. It'll be in the program notes. If you still have time and between now and other future editions, support the show, support his project. I think it's that important and that vital. It's great to see a Kickstarter campaign create a reality for someone that had a dream originally. And one of the things you could take away from Alex too is he had a dream, he had a vision, he put his talents to work and he got it done. So right now he's raised about $15,000 of his original $12,000 goal with 348 backers. That says that this stuff has traction. It has traction to it. So the future of the comic book industry and for future writers, I will absolutely tell you, check this out. Consider all the different options and the derivations that exist in diversity when you create your works, because it will go a very long way. And so thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Thank you, Alex, for coming on to the show. I appreciate every single one of you for supporting our podcast. Stay positive, because when you're positive, anything's possible. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Social Psychic Radio Show. Don't forget to join us for another episode next time. If you enjoyed the show, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give us a review on iTunes. You can also check us out on Facebook, and don't forget to visit the Social Psychic YouTube channel. Until next time, it's a big world out there. Keep an open mind, embrace your paradigms, and know that the universe is always yours to explore.